Greetings and goodbye. This is the end of the line. So it's all about you, and that's been true since day one. I realize I've given a lot of personal opinions and expressed passion, and sometimes been obscure, and talked. I've put a lot of effort into this over the last 3 months, and enjoyed it thoroughly. It was really a great learning experience for me and helped me organize my own thinking. This format is terrible, if not being with other people, with other interested parties to talk about science. But it did have the advantage of doing these things as vignettes. And what that allowed me to do was to focus my thinking on particular topics one at a time, rather than thinking about how to fill up a 90-minute episode in the classroom. And I found that really intellectually stimulating. Hopefully you found it of some value. At any rate, it is about you. At the end of the day, I'm not going to say who, but I had a relatively well-known scientist in my office, and as I often do, I grabbed his book off my bookshelf and I asked him to sign it for me. And then I just asked him about his career, and he was telling me that he had basically over the years realized that in terms of his own research accomplishments, which I found this sad and probably overly harsh, but in terms of his own research accomplishments, that he felt that the world would not have really been any different had he never participated in the scientific endeavor. And I get that. I have a friend, again, I'm not going to tell you who, whether it's a she or a he, but this person said to me that during grad school, he or she had two extremely high-profile papers, one in Nature and one in Science, and in both cases realized that if she or he had not done her work, that same work would have been done and come out a month later. And so the claim was, that maybe in terms of the overall research enterprise, most of us, certainly me, the world does not turn upon our efforts, let's say. But what this person said in my office was that he really felt that he had been part of passing the baton, the important baton of science, from one generation to the next. And in trying to provide some insight and provide intuition and provide some passion and provide some resolution of curiosity. And so when I say it's all about you, it's not some sort of formality. I mean it very sincerely. So what have you accomplished? What have we done together? So at the start, we began with order of magnitude estimates, and we talked about how to think about what sets the growth rate of E. coli. I'm not going to reiterate that. You can go watch it. And the spirit of this whole thing was about, I like to think of Archimedes. Archimedes, although it's a very sad story, if you can read about it in Plutarch. And Archimedes was in Syracuse under the siege of the Romans, and there were orders, do not kill this guy Archimedes. And he was doing a calculation in the sand, and a Roman soldier came up to him and demanded him to identify himself and whatever, and Archimedes told him to chill out and that he was busy calculating, and the guy killed him. But I like that picture of doing calculations in the sand. So, in this course, what we've tried to do is we've tried to mathematicize the cartoons. There's very profound, important cartoons like the one in the lower left that shows you the circuit associated with chemotaxis, and we can actually turn that into some mathematics and get a lot out of it. In the hands of people like Ned Wingreen and Yu-Hai Tu, they have said such deep things about chemotaxis on the basis of mathematicizing that cartoon. I also wanted to say something. One time I gave a homework to some undergrads at Caltech that involved these order of magnitude estimates, and one of them told me, we're sophisticated, we don't do arithmetic. And I said, no, you're unsophisticated. That's the reason you don't do arithmetic. And doing these kinds of order of magnitude estimates, being able to get an answer, I think of Enrico Fermi. I can get an answer in 15 minutes to any question you want to ask. And Sylvain Schweber was a great modern historian of physics, and he made the argument that the rise of physics in America after World War II had, in a way, to do with the spirit of, as Bob Austin said in this quote at the bottom, physics isn't worth a damn unless you put in some numbers. So putting in the numbers. We did few times few arithmetic. I'm a huge fan of that. I learned about that from Sanjoy Mahajan and few times few is 10 allows us to come up with simple ways to make estimates. I think is very useful. And then we also did the square root rule, where if we don't know the magnitude of a thing, we come from below, we find a lower bound guess, we find an upper bound guess, we take the product and then take their square root, and that amounts to taking the average of the exponents. So that was very powerful and useful. I certainly made the argument that probability distributions are the natural language for prediction in biology, and that was a lot of fun and really interesting. And of course, there was so much more we could have done. Those of you taking the course for credit did do more, but again, it was really very juvenile effort on all of our parts. We could have done so much more. I bring this up just because I want to remind everybody that although it's easy to sit around and pontificate about how we're going to solve this or that disease, or we're going to create this or that technology that does this or that thing, we must not ignore history. Those who do not remember history are condemned to repeat it. That's George Santayana, if I remember correctly. All that we have learned from history is that we've learned nothing from history. I think that's Hegel. It's problematic to not remember our history. And what history has taught us over and over and over again is the unanticipated consequences of intellectual achievements, such as probability, which really started with some letters between Pascal and Fermat about games of chance. My dad has had a bout with cancer, and he was shot in the 1960s with a shotgun while hunting. He has a number of shotgun pellets in his head, and so he cannot be exposed to magnetic fields. And so as a sort of funny gallows humor, he always, when he's getting positron emission tomography done on him, he doesn't tell the technicians that there are little spheres in his head, and he gets a big kick out of the fact that, you know, they see these little spheres. And what does it have to do with anything? Positron emission tomography was not on the horizon when in 1932 Carl Anderson of Caltech discovered positrons. You know, nobody knew that that was coming. So it's just, we don't know what the next big thing is going to be. So we talked about the Boltzmann distribution. You know, that was awesome, so powerful, so general. We did dimensionless numbers, and that was, you know, I hope you had fun with that, but I think of it as being like one of the main superpowers of quantitative science, is dimensionalizing things and also figuring out what the relevant dimensionless numbers are. And here's some examples. I'm not going to belabor it. We've been through it. I'm just giving you a tour of what we've accomplished together. I'm going to skip on that one. I certainly made the point, and I love this, that Thaler, in his talk, non-equilibrium physics is like non-elephant biology. You know, there's slogans to live by, and that's one. It's just worth remembering. Most of the world we see around us is not in equilibrium, and most of the biology we see around us is not elephants. So non-equilibrium physics is like non-elephant biology. So I talked with great passion about the simple relationships, the linear relationships between flux and degree of disequilibrium. That's embodied, for example, in Fourier's law, the part C shown here, or Fick's law, which is part B, or Ohm's law, which is part A. I have a good friend, and he likes to tell me about the 3 laws of Ohm. You know, so I is equal to V over R, and then V is equal to IR, and what's the third one? It's so silly that I can't even remember. R is equal to V over I, whatever. You know, it's a joke. It's meant to be funny. So you guys did all sorts of numerical solutions and simulations and so on in Python, and I just wanted to point it out. We solved differential equations of growth. We measured bacterial growth rates. We simulated random walks. We did spread the butter, chemical master equations for thinking about diffusion, and you did that to look at FRAP, and so on. I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of the dizzying pace at which science is taking place in your lifetimes and in mine. So in 1903, at Kill Devil Hill in North Carolina on the Outer Banks, Wilbur and Orville Wright used their first so-called flyer. 66 years later, Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. 66 years. That's one nowadays short human lifetime. When my parents were born, most scientists, for example, Eric Davidson, one of my former colleagues at Caltech, who's no longer with us, and a friend, his PhD advisor at Rockefeller, I know this because I read about it. He thought that protein was the genetic material, as did most scientists. We've gone from that, when my parents were young, to one of my friends sequencing his own genetic material in his reproductive organs. You know, it's truly stunning. We can do that. Our kids are going to have their DNA sequence as part of their medical records. It's probably I'm going to, probably you will. It's inevitable. So things are moving at a dizzying pace, and so and part of the reason I show Carl Woza here is because before Carl Woza came along, there was a whole domain of life as different from me and E. coli, as it's as different from E. coli as you and I are from E. coli. So that's the so-called archaea, and so that's the rapid pace at which things are going. This is a series of kind of like random snapshots of things that are on my mind. At the end of his book on optics, Newton had a series of queries, and I would like for you, I gave an assignment actually. My last assignment, homework assignment, included asking the students to come up with their own order of magnitude estimate, to come up with their own syllabus for this course. And the reason is that I want you to figure out what your queries are. Don't, never forget the two words, I wonder. I wonder. And the reason I'm showing this is that I was sparked, my imagination was sparked as a 17-year-old when I learned about how Eratosthenes measured the radius of the Earth. That was the moment in which I learned that science was a relationship between somebody that had an inquiry and the natural world, and one did not need authorities. One just needed to be clever and to try and find a way to answer the question. In this case, this guy measured the radius of the Earth stunningly. This is from the ESPCI in Paris. It's on the wall. This is where Pierre and Marie Curie were. It's where Dijen was the director. And this says, "True science teaches above all to doubt." That's all. That's Miguel de Unamuno. True science teaches above all to doubt. So, I'm pretty much done. I just wanted to say, here I'm showing you 3 interesting artistic works. One of them is from Jackson Pollock, one of them is from Pablo Picasso, and one of them is from Henri Matisse. And for me personally, I have the most sympathy for Matisse, although as time goes on, I have to say I become ever more a fan of Jackson Pollock. I think when I was young, I just was one of those people that would say, oh, he just threw paint at a canvas. But the more I look at him, the more I love him. But Matisse is the message here. So, and the reason I guess I feel that is that I don't really feel that I have any competence, whatever, scientifically or mathematically or whatever. But I do have sort of what Matisse had at the end of his life. He was a great painter, but at some point he wasn't able to paint anymore. But he still needed to do art. And so what he did is he undertook something very rudimentary, which is he cut figures out of paper with scissors, like you would do as a kindergartner. As a kindergartner, I did that. We cut out images and we used glue and we put them on construction paper. And so what does this have to do with anything? It has everything to do with, I told you, it's all about you in this final vignette. And it has to do with you. This might be not quite right the way I'm going to say this, but I feel like the way that our education system is structured largely is to teach you how to be a perfect Dutch master landscape painter or portrait painter. But maybe that's not your cup of tea. Maybe you want to cut out artwork with construction paper, or maybe you want to go down to the beach in Bandon, Oregon, and you want to take the driftwood and you want to construct a Viking ship, which is what I saw in December. And I talked to the artist. The thing was amazing. It was one of the most beautiful artistic works I've ever seen. And he said, oh, the king tide is coming, and by tomorrow this thing will be gone. And he built another structure, and sure enough, the next day I went onto the beach with my book co-author Julie Theriault, and there was nothing left. The driftwood was gone, and this was a beautiful structure. So I'm convinced that this is a great time to be a scientist, and there's so many exciting things going on. There's so many ways to be curious and to address that curiosity, and there's so many ways to be puzzled and to not know how to figure out that puzzlement. There are many great challenges faced by human beings right now, and I think that many of those challenges demand a scientific resolution. And so, the question is, what will you do with your canvas? Will you be a Dutch painter, which is awesome? Or Will you be a Matisse, or will you be a sculptor with driftwood on the beach? Or, there's a house nearby in the Outer Sunset area. I forgot what it's called. Maybe it's called the Bubble House or something. And it's like the house became a piece of artwork. So that's it. That says it all. There's a book by Jeremy Bernstein, the title of which to me is like one of the mantras of life. It's called The Life It Brings. And so for me as the professor of this class, I've had that privilege. I had the ability to have a scientific career in which I got to exercise my curiosity and sense of wonder, and to try to exploit any technical skills that I might have and the many brilliant students that I've been surrounded with might have, to try to penetrate the great unknown. And that's been a huge pleasure. And I'm going to end just on the note, speaking of the brilliant students, of saying that I basically coerced 4 students who are in the last 6 months of their PhDs to be the TAs for this course. So I'm talking about Manuel Albrazo at the upper left, Susie Beeler in the upper right, Soichi Hirakawa in the lower left, and Vahe Galistan in the lower right. All of them have taught me so much, and they've been generous in this course, but behind the scenes, they've been committed to trying to be clear thinkers, to be helpful, to be insightful, to have intuition, to be rigorous, and to question. And so I think we're all lucky to have interacted with them. So on that note, that's the 2021 pandemic edition of Physical Biology, The Cell. One of my great privileges is over the last 20 years to have had the opportunity to think about this subject and to teach it at Caltech and elsewhere, to be trusted by the Caltech community, the students, the parents, the trustees, all that. And, I wouldn't normally say this in a course, but, as I'm sitting here, I'm very cognizant of that privilege and the responsibility. So I hope that this course has been, in some sense, inspiring to you, and that you will go out into the world, and someday down the line you will have a chance, to the extent that this meant something to you, to pay it forward.